Amazing. So, hi and welcome to our second talk we brought today. We named it CS1V 2.0, or introductory programming, and how we attempted at improving it, and hopefully also how we're gonna improve based on what we did this year. So if Klaus and I suddenly crash later today, it's due to us maybe have been overdoing the changes we made to our course, and hopefully we can not only tell you what we've done, also why we did it, and hopefully also get a conversation going about what we can do more to improve our introductory programming courses. So I want to take you through lots of things. I want to motivate why we did this. We made a lot of changes, one of them being shifting from teacher-centered focus or teaching to student-centered learning. We tried to identify variation within our student cohort in terms of experience, implement programming exercises in a different way than we used to, talk more about that, and also increasing focus on imperative programming coming from an objects-oriented perspective. But maybe who am I? I brought an entire slide. I don't know why I did that, but my name is Sebastian. I have a master's in computer science, a bachelor in software development. I've done a couple of different things. Most importantly, I am teaching introductory programming this semester with Klaus. And so introductory programming at our university.
Sorry, is your role, is it a lecturer or?
So my role is kind of weird. I had this semester both been employed as a assistant lecturer. I've been a research assistant, and I've also signed my PhD contract. So
a typical PhD student.
Yeah.
You'll start a PhD.
I started the 1st of January. We actually postponed the PhD to
He could help.
change units. Yeah.
He's co-teaching it with me,
Yeah.
you know, on an equal basis. So we're going to
Yeah.
And so I'm also new out of the educational part of like taking my master's finished this summer.
Yeah.
I took this course we redid 5 years ago to be exact. And so this is for the same bachelor that Klaus was talking about before, software development. We have around 166 students enrolled, a couple of them dropped out. It's a 15 ECTS point course. They have 7 weekly assignments in the first part of the course. That's followed by 2 bi-weekly assignments after a fall break. And then there's 3 mandatory tests intertwined throughout the semester. And then at the end, which is what they're currently doing, which is why we could come here, they're doing a 4-week project, which is handled by an external lecturer.
Awesome. Could you just talk a little bit about the 4-week project? What does it entail?
So the 4-week project entails that they're working in groups of 3, developing a small platform that in the last couple of years cases, and this year is a streaming service that does not have the capabilities to stream. But it presents
without the video,
yeah.
Okay.
So you know,
whose preference he
drop the boring parts of the Netflix platform.
Sure. And what was the decision behind adopting Java as a programming language and instructive programming course?
See, so this is a debate I don't think we should.
No, it's not.
But the reason it was made, I think, many years ago. And of course, Java or object-oriented programming do have some problems. And we're going to talk about those in a minute. But actually, I think partially was chosen due to the book Objects First with Java as a good resource of learning to program. Another thing, and questions are more than welcome, we might derail a little bit, I hope that's okay. Another reason is that we like to base our exercises on not things, but people, and base them in reality. I can tell you, I now get why we then choose Java to do that in. And we'll talk more about that later, but there are particular things that are more difficult to create a task surrounding when you're not doing object-oriented programming or modeling. So that's definitely a big thing. Whether I personally would choose to do Java, I am not sure. I can also tell you we actually do work with the BlueJ IDE that is accompanying. Yeah, exactly. Despite some problems when OS updated right before one of the 3 mandatory tests, it was a really long night for me trying to figure out how to solve that. So this is the course we're dealing with. Yeah, that was a tough one. So the reason we decided to sit down and change this course is that it's been running the same way for many years. That's one thing we needed to reinvent, at least the slide deck. But secondly, the lecturers of the courses that came after began questioning the basic imperative skills of the students. So this is a particular, we saw that in algorithms and data structures, which is the second semester course. that are they even capable of composing basic constructs? So most of them, and we see that on the grade distribution from the course itself, do appear to gain theoretical knowledge of programming. It wasn't until last year, I think, that we introduced actually students coding live at an oral exam, which is the format. Yeah.
Can I ask maybe stupid question, but if I would ask you to define programming in one sentence, how would you define it? What is programming for you?
I can say it in one word. Can I say it?
You wanted the Danish word?
Yeah.
Informationstransformation. So the beauty of the Danish language is that we can combine words together, right?
Yeah.
So information, representation, transformation is like in Danish a combined word.
Yeah.
So it's the idea of transforming and making computations on something.
It's a
So it's not only coding, it's
broader.
It's the yeah. To me, I would say that it is not the sole that you write code. It is the code does something. It's the intention of the code. Yeah.
I'm just wondering what we're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, but programming here implying that you know how to construct basic programs that utilize various imperative programming constructs, including those of the object-oriented language Java.
Mhm.
So this, in this case, it is that they need to be able to utilize virtual dispatching, inheritance, and so on and so forth in a context of a smaller program, and they apply that with the use of some design patterns in the final form project. But are they capable of doing this? And so taking it down, what do we mean? Are they capable of doing this? A particular example is, are they able to write down a syntactically correct for loop and then increment a variable during that loop? Let's say they're counting vocals in a sentence.
Yeah.
So apparently some students, anecdotally from the course responsible of the algorithms course, said the students were not capable of doing so. And so that's anecdotal, but what I did in my master thesis was I sat down to discover or identify what kind of students who just went through a CS1 course, what kind of misconceptions or understandings did they have of particular programming language constructs? Yeah.
Did you study, just, we're all on the same, see that? Did you study the misconceptions that the students had, or did you study particularly the threshold concepts that the students have? Which one?
Not the threshold concepts.
Okay.
No. So it was it was a combination of sort of a analytical and not generative, but they had to explain from a piece of code handed on paper. They had to explain the program execution in terms of method calls.
Yeah.
And the program state once we reach a particular point.
I see.
Yeah. So quantifying the mistakes the students made, and then during like the experiment was formed around a think aloud experiment.
Yeah.
I tried to identify the variations within the existence, sort of drawing on terminology and going into that, but not explicitly detailing anything about the threshold concepts.
Okay.
But I do agree with literature stating that maybe, as Agatha wrote, that object-oriented programming and so on might be related to a threshold concept. Yeah, but at least they had a real difficulty following program execution of very basic imperative and programming language constructs like a for each loop. What does that entail in regards to the order of execution? And so this is kind of a problem, right? Because if there's one thing we want them to be capable of, that in structured programming courses, at least using those basic imperative features. So that's one thing. That was sort of the offset for this, but there were a lot of things we wanted to change. We wanted to increase the opportunities of learn by doing. We've been teaching some professional courses as well. We really succeeded at actually facilitating learning by changing the focus to them programming. We want to understand student diversity in terms of experience. We talked about experience maybe correlates with a choice of exercise, but we do also know from the literature that it causes a lot of variation in how well the students are performing in class. And we also wanted to be, as somebody who just came from studying myself, going into academia and teaching, it's really difficult to find any way to create exercises or programming exercises that are systematically made. Like, how do I actually generate an exercise?
Yeah.
So we wanted to learn more about that. And then also increase focus on imperative programming based on the anecdotal evidence and what we found in my thesis. So this is a course that is ongoing. So some of this, I also want to have a debate with you guys about, because I actually have some questions for you. I see a question, I hear a question already.
Could you please go back to the previous slide.
What is this?
Is it this one? Right, okay, let's read it on this one. I think, again, anecdotally, there's some literature that supports this, which is students cannot visualize the code execution. So if they used software or website that, actually executes the code, then it would improve their understanding, irrespective of the problem that they're being given. How do you respond to that?
Tracing, yeah.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think there are other opportunities to explore
Of course.
tracing, and I think one we're pursuing right now in a separate study that we're conducting while running this is the debugger
Okay.
as a tool to do that.
Right.
I also recently reviewed an interesting paper that talked about program output as a way. So that's confidential. Yeah, okay, I cannot say more about that. So there's something going on about that, but I think there are many ways to generate an idea of the notional machine, or this comprehension of both program execution and state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one thing that borders to what you're saying here is that my experience from pretty extensive introductory programming is that it's crucial that the students understand the system model and able to understand how the program works. So if they don't understand the underlying system model, how a computer roughly behaves, what it's capable of doing, and so on, it's very hard for them to understand. Then it's just magic.
Exactly.
What's going on. And one thing that we discovered, now it's almost 20 years ago, was that, which is also backed up in literature, is that it's, for some reason, for beginners in new programming, it seems harder when you program a computer to execute a program, because the computer is both the development entity, but also the execution entity. So when we let them program on a computer to program like a Lego robot or a microbit or something, it becomes clearer for them. Okay, so on this one I write the code. On this one I execute it. But when they write on the same device as they execute, it becomes harder for them to sort it out in their brains. So
Definitely, but I also think, I don't remember who put it like that, but we need to understand, as somebody learning to program, that there's a significant difference between what is written on as program text and the semantics that is intended by the notional machine, the machine model, whatever we want to call it. And that's one thing, but also another thing is that students might understand individual parts of the programming language in isolation. Yeah, I know what a for loop is, but the combination of programming language constructs is really where their understanding breaks down.
But are you teaching them a programming language, or are you teaching them programming?
So let's dig into that.
That's what I think question.
No, but I mean, it's
we are teaching them programming.
great.
Yeah. So we are teaching them programming, but we do not believe that the objects first book is the direction to go in. It's about learning the syntax and the semantics of a language. And going with, we want to teach them here in particular imperative and object-oriented programming in Java in this case, right? But we don't really know what the outcome of this is yet. It's only based on some student studies that are being run on the side and our test results from the mandatory tests and how they're performing, right?
And evaluation also, right?
Yeah, and then evaluation will bring that up. But that's again the student experience. That does not really indicate whether they're actually learning to program or not. But first and foremost, what we did was we shifted from teacher-centered to student-centered learning, right? So typically what we're doing, or we've been doing, and I think most of our courses are this way, maybe yours are not, but lectures contain multiple different techniques and theories. And here we are trying, and we'll get back to this concept of praxeology from mathematics. So something we're doing right now is we're trying to branch into the didactic theories and so on from mathematics and try to apply them in computer science. And so techniques in this case would be, let's say, how do you use, write, and understand a while loop, while a theory at the opposite end would be, when do you pick one over the other? And how do you compose various techniques, which in turn would be what we call technology. And so we have maybe a for loop, we introduce a while loop, we introduce a for loop, we introduce many different things in this block of a lecture, right? And then afterwards we have a lab where we have exercises that iterate through these concepts, maybe tries to combine them in exercises. But these two things, we might have 4 or 5 exercises related to while loops, right? Depends. but they are very, very separated. So what we typically see, this is a week in introductory programming at our university last year. You'd have a lecture on Tuesday, followed by a lab or exercises right after for another 2 hours. And then again on Thursday, you would have the same format. There would be a lecture, there would be exercise, and we have something called live coding, where some TAs are coding live. Kind of makes sense, right? But this is very separated, right? So what we ended up doing is we said, well, what if a student in here is lost already when we introduce the while loop, right? How in any way are they, maybe they're going to pick up on the for loop, but that's probably not very likely, right? So maybe as the lectures get more and more complicated and build more and more on top of each other inside of an individual lecture, they will be completely lost by the point they reach the actual exercises, right? Because how in the world they've got all this information, but they didn't even get A. So maybe their opportunity for understanding B would be better if they first had exercises and doing for loops before going on. So that's what we did. We changed it up. We combined the 2 blocks. We did the mixed, and sometimes we had some exercise slots, because this is also comes at the cost of students, since there are 166 students sitting in a lecturing hall. We do lose some of the group dynamics that arise from sitting and working together in a lab. So we did have space and time for actually having exercise slots. So before we had some kind of technique, for loop, while loop, then exercises in those. So what we do instead is that we now take, a for loop, we practice that, and we go on to the next thing. And we typically would, ideally, right, we would have many exercises that not only introduce this construct or this idea of the loop, right, but also uses it in combination with what they've previously been shown. Because the problem is really that once they begin putting things together, things appear to fall apart. That's also what the literature states. So again, while, and then we had however many exercises we wanted, and the same for the for loop. In practice, it's slightly different because there's a time constraint, right?
Yeah.
Exercises can actually, in our case, most of the time, they exceed the 2-hour duration that's allocated for them, right? It kind of makes sense the students complete exercises at different speeds. So in the lecture, typically to every technique, or let's say a loop. Oh, that's the screen.
So it's the same.
We actually only have 1 or 2 exercises that we introduce. And that kind of sucks, to be honest, because some of them need a lot more practice doing it. But then at the end, we had some more open-ended exercise. We'll talk more about that later, where they have to choose open-ended on the things they've been introduced previously, to sort of not only foster that they get to know about the different techniques, but that they actually also learn how to pick either one given a specific problem description. And what are the preliminary effects of that? Well, this is a pie chart, and you can probably not read a lot of it. So what we did was we did a early evaluation 8 weeks into the course, and we got, I think, 99 respondents overall, various questions. Here we see 50 of them actually answering what they feel about the format specifically compared to the other courses. All right, we want to know what they like and what they do not like. And so I did some qualitative analysis of this. And actually what we found is that the students, some just specify somehow that it's easier to learn. That's not really valuable. It's nice that they like it. But a lot of the students, 32% of these 50 students actually responded that it was the confrontation of it, that you're forced to sit down and work with whatever you just been introduced instantly. There's also slightly some people mentioning it's about the breaks they achieve in that you shift from lecture to exercise. But at the same time, you also expand it to an additional 2 hours you're sitting in the same room. Yeah.
I think form variation is important here.
Yeah.
That you can't sit and concentrate. You're varying the now you're working with something, then you can listen again, and I think that's important also.
Yeah. And then there's various smaller cases. Some do prefer the regular lab that you have, but it's a significant minority.
This activity, does it happen in a lecture hall?
Yeah,
it happens in the auditorium.
Yeah.
We clear every 3rd row, and the TAs can come in and look at everyone in the big
Oh, so
auditorium.
you don't have like a specific space?
Well, the problem is that we need to fit both purposes. We don't have a room that's big enough. So the only thing we have is an auditorium.
Yeah.
And if we clear every 3rd row, the TAs can reach people either from behind or from the front.
Is it like a raised?
Yes, it is, with a huge screens in front.
how I solved this problem in my department,
Yeah.
because I told them I hate lectures, I hate like, talking for 2 hours, even though it does seem that I like it. It would still be the computer labs. In one of the computer rooms, I would be streamed and I would introduce a concept for 10 minutes. And then, for the next 20 minutes, they would work on exercises, and then 10 minutes and then 20 minutes. And then I would go like around the rooms and ask. But I also had TAs, and the TAs would be able to, do that.
It's very similar.
Yeah, but also the other thing is, I told the students if they want to display their code, they can join into the Zoom session and they can take over control of the, the screen, and then they can walk through the solution and demonstrate it to other people. And they seem to like that.
Yeah, we do the same. We do the follow-up afterwards, we do it in a bit different way, the way we do it, and I think that's a great benefit of Zoom and something we should consider. But what we do instead is actually we live code it so that more people get to share on the way.
Yeah.
How did you do it? Did anyone do it differently?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or introducing, based on what they tell us to do, we introduce slight errors that we know based on
Common
TA
sense.
feedback.
Yeah.
So we actually utilize the TAs very much in this lecture on giving constant feedback as to where the problems. So you just have to submit the code, and there's a new, if they do not make it within that week, there's a resubmission that didn't end until 2 weeks ago. And then they have that for 7 weeks. Then the 2 assignments that they're doing that are bi-weekly are graded by teaching assistants that assess whether they reach the goal of the exercise. It's a typical.
So do they submit the code and the teaching assistant?
Read through it, yeah. And then the tests are 1 hour long, only using lecture slides and previous code to solve a program that is solvable if you've known the material, right? And that focus of those individual tests change depending on what they've been taught, right? And that is everything, and then also the project you need to hand in to be eligible for the exam. And all that needs to be passed. So the actual proper assessment of the capabilities, I would argue, is a bit later because there's some room for.
So we do it a little bit differently, or very much differently in the course that you want
Yeah,
to.
I mean, I can click it in because the way we do is almost every week they have like assignments.
Yeah.
But then we do like, maybe we have 7 TAs and we'll take like 9, sometimes 9 hours in a workday, and every TA will talk to students 2 by 2. So you have 10 minutes with 2 students, and then everyone in parallel.
20 minutes.
5, sometimes
I
back and
will,
forth.
so we sit down.
But we do a lot more individual assessment, which is
Yeah, so we
How many students do you have?
150.
Same as us.
So what we do, and we do this for other courses, so we have the students get 10 to 20 minutes with the TA, where the TA asks the students to run the code, demonstrate it, and ask questions about the code. If something isn't working, the TA can ask, okay, so what do you think the problem is? Can we fix it? And this way, the TA get a really good view on what the students actually know, and the student get a really good feedback on what they actually know. And if the students fail to demonstrate their knowledge, then they are sent to a follow-up workshop where the assignment is walked through for those who need it, and they can't leave that workshop until they have finished it and passed it.
So that's really interesting.
And then we have a project at the end.
Yeah.
But there's also something about these 2 different ways of running this course that's, at least from our perspective, would be an either or. We wouldn't be able to do both things, and that's due to the time allocation of the TAs. Because with this new format, the TAs needs to be available for the full 2 times 4 hour block, right? And so we wouldn't have the time. I really think it's an interesting idea. And
No, it's not.
What do you think?
I mean, actually, I've been doing that for some years in 2 different courses, and I would never go back to having students submit their code and me reading it without having the student present to explain it to you. Because that is painful fit work.
It is,
Say that.
but yeah, it is. I really like how we're having the TAs present. I guess you have as well, having them present during those lectures, because the feedback that they provide when we're explicit about what we want them to tell us, they're actually really good at noticing things. And I also think highlighting, oh my God, I keep doing that. Highlighting what the students find particularly good here, 79, answering 1/4 of those people are, of course, recommending or highlighting the teaching assistants, and another 60% the format. So at least there seems to be some priority for this format that the students really like. Now, of course, taking extracts from this qualitative survey, they do feel like the teaching is going too fast. Some of the students, right? So some of them, yeah, some of them feel like it's going too slow, right? That's like a given, and we'll see why in just a bit. But there are also some very elaborate answers. I don't know what happened with this year's enrolled students, but they are quite expressive in terms of what they like and what they do not like in a constructive manner. This guy basically highlighted that is a little like learning a music instrument. It makes sense that you do not have a teacher who runs theoretical one-way communication to their students, but that the teacher allows the students to try things and practice before moving on, right? This is what we really wanted to do with this format. Yeah.
I mean, but you said you don't know, you feel like the students were more expressive?
In terms of their feedback, so yeah.
But maybe you also did this big project where you redid the whole course.
Yes. But I don't know how aware we made them of that.
No?
Is it first year students?
Yeah,
It is
So
first.
it's their first experience with
Oh,
that.
that's interesting.
Yeah, maybe don't know what.
They wouldn't even know that this is not normal. They would.
Well, they actually, a lot of them are comparing
It's
it to
better
the
than gymnasium.
yeah, but they're actually they're comparing this course in the qualitative answers with their other courses they have at the school. So that is project work and communication, and it's discrete mathematics. Now, in particular, discrete mathematics is highlighted, but we shouldn't go into detail with that because that's a notoriously difficult course for the students, at least.
We also give them a math course at the same time as
Yeah.
we take the intro.
So do you mean, I suspect that like for us, your students are very diverse in prior experiences with programming.
Stay on that.
Okay. So
Let's look at it.
So I basically have two questions about that. First, do all the students get exactly the same content, or do you have like extra challenges for those who might?
See, that's something I want us to consider.
We just talked about that at coding calling.
So let's talk about that. So that's actually a discussion I want to have with you guys, because I found myself in quite a, yeah. So I got this data, right? Apparently they're also really good at answering surveys. So this is all 166 students who answered this. What we have here is those that have no experience, not counting HTML or Excel work, that is 53 students. Some that have made somewhere between 10 and 50 lines of code, and that can be in Scratch or anything else. That is 23. And then we have those that have made between 50 and 250 lines of self-written code in an actual general purpose programming language, 55. We have some that have an AP degree of similar in computer science, and then 32 that have written like lots of code in multiple languages. So it's almost a 50-50 split here. This is the data, which is kind of interesting since the program is stating explicitly that we do not require any previous programming experience. And so the question is really, how should this knowledge impact? Yeah?
Is programming mandatory in high school?
No. Okay. So it's not, it depends on, no, it's not in any kind of high school actually.
Or is it programming in the primary school?
No.
No.
Because here it's.
So we're
We're
reaching the point where that is. But it's,
They're trying to figure out how to do it, but.
But not upper secondary.
In gymnasiet, as a method in mathematics. So
Okay, as a part of that.
we didn't get that far. We're still discussing whether it should be part of existing courses or a separate course, or a combination of the two. It's really dragging out, yeah. But this knowledge is kind of nice to have, but the question is really, how should we use it? So I think one important thing to consider is there extra challenges? How should those challenges be presented? So I've thought to myself, what is the focus of CS1 first and foremost?
You mentioned CS0 just as a response to this.
No, I think we'll get to that in a bit, to telling what we've actually done. So should the things we offer be extracurricular or mandatory? Or should there be like a split and divide in And based on your experience, we know that some do separate, in the US in particular, right, separate CS1 and then do CS1X and so on, and various courses. What should we
There's
be
a paper by Ray Lister where he has this huge course. And then midway, he give them a multiple choice test. And those that pass that, kind of, he let them go. He sort of, here is some challenge, you can work by yourself. And then those that don't pass, he kind of, they really need to go over the first part more or less again. So I think it's an interesting paper, and I think it might be along the lines of you. But it's different, but it's still kind of similar in how to deal with a cohort that's very distributed.
Yeah, I know that they're doing something similar at KTH that has been published by Viggo Kahn also, where they have like the default track in the CS1 course, and then they have the plus track for those who know a little, and the plus for those who know a lot. And they also have, I don't think they call it the minus track, but for those who need extra support and extra lectures.
So the way it's done in Denmark, we most probably wouldn't be allowed to do that. But what we are doing and what we're seeing in Denmark is that we, for example, offer some a brief 3-day onboarding course before semester start to make the students help catch up. That was published at Code Calling this year. We know that Aalborg, or is it Aarhus is doing a semester-long onboarding course that is extra help. We provide additionally something called Study Lab, which is a help lab thing, 3 times 2 hours a week where the students can attend. But that's for the students that do not have the experience or need the help, right? So the question then becomes, what do we do about those that do have the experience? Because that's half of our student cohort, actually.
Yeah.
So I had another question a few minutes ago about this diversity among the incoming students. Our experience is that some students who have a lot of experience can't really program, that we have to reprogram them. Is this something that you have?
So this is one of the things we've been talking a lot about.
Self-efficacy, a mental model.
So actually, we just skipped over those slides, but self-efficacy definitely in terms of not only how you identify self-confidence wise, but also in terms of the comparison with others, which is something we studied and saw a lot on our onboarding course. That was actually why people joined in. It was also to be able to assess them with the surroundings. And mental models was part of the focus of my thesis. So we saw some particular very weak mental models, but they were mostly found in the very inexperienced students in our case. So what we really haven't seen, anecdotally we feel the same way, that we have to reprogram the students, but it's not something we can say it in the sense that we've seen a lot of students overcomplicate solutions. But beyond that, we cannot quantify or qualify that further.
Totally, we've given a lot of maximum grades to students who had never programmed before, which is sort of might be an indication that, you know.
I mean, when I was responsible for that course, I don't know how it's now, but if you have students that overcomplicate and basically do have bad programming habits.
Well, then we send them to computer architect.
Yeah, then we fail them and say, okay, this is not good. You have to redo it, and you have to, because we don't value just functional code. We value readability.
Yes, that's also our number one.
I also want to tweak it in just to slow you down. Like the beginning of our course, the first 3 or 4 weeks, it starts off, we do block programming, and we do block programming with microbits.
What?
Yes. And you know what? Block programming is.
But I mean, just to show you where we're at. So we have the first couple weeks be block because we know almost all of, like a lot of students have experience with block more. And then there's a lecture, they do like a little project in the beginning, and then there's a lecture, and then we go block to Python. And then it's this is what we had in block before, and this is how you do it in Python. And so that's how we kind of, there's a very concrete jump.
We actually had the conversation about block-based programming, other types of programming that are not textual in this sense, with communication and IT education at the Copenhagen University. Now, the thing is, at least according to literature I have found, there's no clear indication of whether block-based programming improves the students' learning beyond the syntactical part. Semantics is still really difficult for students to learn. And so based on what I've read, and I really would like some pointers towards that, I do not see right now that that is the right direction for a software development program, but I might be very wrong.
I would say it depends. I mean, the reason that we introduced this microbit, because it was me that introduced it a few years ago, was that so in the primary school in Sweden, so basically what we do in the first 2 weeks is what they're supposed to do during 9 years in primary school. And then they start with block programming because it's easy to understand. You don't have to learn the syntax, and you can't really do typing errors. You can actually focus on the function. You have a simulator, you have like a selection of blocks that you can use. You can focus on the operation of
the
the
separation
program.
of the development, the
Yeah,
execution
exactly.
environment.
And when they understood the basic concepts like loop, or rather repetition, conditionals, and sequential, and block programming is object-oriented. Then we do the translation to text-based, and we used to do first Python on the microbit, so we will still use the microbit, but now we take the step all the way to Python on computers, I think.
Just to interject, because like I was teaching a lecture in the UK, if we introduce block-based to students for our first year, they're going to be
Alright.
yeah, exactly. Because number one, the majority of our students, and sadly some universities treat students as customers, they are going to be so upset about joining a computing course and starting with blocks, which is not serious code. Yeah.
This part of the student cohort already hates us of forcing them to use BlueJ.
Mm.
And they want to use a professional IDE that does allow for dark mode, which BlueJ does, but they haven't realized. And so that is a hassle already. But I also see the value in it. I have just not yet found any peer-reviewed evidence of this. I would also expect there to be.
We should have had the call here. He's the guy teaching.
So I have 2 comments on this. So one is that there is not clear evidence that it helps them afterwards with the technical. That's a major thing. And if you really want to go this direction, I think Stripe, so this is Michael Curling's new project, would be the direction to go.
So it's part of it.
This actually solves and bridges the gap between.
I mean, there's pretty much research done on Scratch for beginners to programming.
And I think
Not software developers,
Yeah, but I mean, we don't do block programming for a semester. We do it for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think we spend some time selling it also, saying that okay, this is to teach the concepts. The nice thing with the microbit programming environment is that you, at the click of a button, can switch between blocks and JavaScript.
Just like
and Python.
And Python now also, yeah.
But I think it's really interesting, and this is sort of entering the debate of does the learning the first language actually transfer to the second language?
It should. I mean, if you teach them the principles, they should be able to make their knowledge.
Literature, I think.
It's still debated.
I can say anecdotally, I was super skeptical to this before, but the students had so much fun because we give a 2-minute project and we just kind of give them some microbits and we'd be like, go do some stuff. And like we see a lot of like group forming and community building.
I'll play the devil's advocate. The students who think they already know programming are gonna hate this so much with the passion of 1,000.
It's about how you said it. I mean,
Yeah.
if you actually talk about the pedagogy, if you talk about the reason, I think that's helps a lot. You won't reach everyone.
Yeah, of course
That's
not.
for sure.
Yeah.
But telling them why and actually having something that they might not have tried in microbits, but that sort of adds, it's not just the.
It's new for most of them.
I kind of want to highlight something that multiple students said now. It's not in the slides, but I think it's very relevant to this discussion. One thing is, so when looking at, I think it was I forgot his name, but he identified 5 steps in which it's difficult to learn to program, like steps you need to overcome. Right? What? Yeah, no, not Dreyfus. It's something with a D. No, but the point is that the first step is motivation and self-efficacy building to some extent, right? And what the block-based programming is giving them, and what we also see the students feedbacking on this course is the many successes they have along the way. Because syntax is a really great barrier to entry in programming for the many first weeks. And so I believe also block-based programming has many other values than simply, as you're stating, like being the gateway for the next language, right? It's also the motivational part of it. It's the idea of the successes they get that also motivates them to keep going and foster self-efficacy because they still face challenges due to the semantics of the language.
One way to deal with the students who think they know everything is, first of all, I give them, every single lecture when I start, when I give them the exercises, I rate them from like easiness to difficulty.
Yeah.
And then the students who finish them quickly, I'm like, okay, since you finished them, could you shadow another student and explain your code? And a lot of them struggle explaining their code. And then they realize there's a huge difference between me coding and explaining it to someone else. And for me, it's a learning opportunity because like 2 birds, 1 stone. You need to learn communication skills. If you cannot break down a problem into simple bits so that a person can understand it, then you really don't understand it yourself, like the finance technique.
It's also a problem with terminology. They often don't have it.
No, of course not. Yeah.
I should also say maybe about our block programming introduction is because the entire program is very based on CDIO. Do you know that?
Could you?
No,
Conceive, design.
Implement, operate. I mean, the idea is that they should, during 2 weeks, do what they are expected to be able to do at the end of their studies. They should come up with an idea, they should design it, they should implement a prototype, and they don't have to operate it, but they should demonstrate and produce a demonstrator in 2 weeks. And to be able to do that as a new student, because this is the first semester also, you have to give them something that doesn't require extensive amount of time. Like the microbits are working really well. The programming environment is designed for 10-year-olds.
But at the same time, it's also a massive success that you actually succeed with that after 2 weeks, right? Like you do go from no idea to an idea that is prototype.
It gives them an idea what will happen during the next 4 years. I mean, okay, so this is how it is to be a systems designer.
Yeah, but going a bit back here to returning just a bit on sort of challenging those that are really capable. There's a guy called Michael Trolle who was I think he was the coach of the male handball in Denmark for many years. He wrote a book. I was at a talk with him his book is called Dreams and Details. And we had a really interesting conversation about what does it mean to identify talent. And so I was also wondering, because we've seen based on previous tests that sometimes we add extra, not mandatory parts to exercises or the tests, and that really disencourages some of the non-experienced students. And yeah, of course, right? But at the same time, if the extracurricular material is not really visible, the experienced students do not go ahead and implement them or solve the problems. And so this is also, I think, where should talent come from? And I was wondering, actually, this is something I thought about a year ago. I was wondering, how do you identify talent?
What is talent? Like, can you explain to me those things?
So to me, and I think what Mikael was talking about in his talk is talent is somebody that has potential to become really good at this. And then this.
So not innate ability.
What, sorry?
Not innate ability.
No.
Rather than potential.
Yeah.
How do you identify potential?
I would say rigorous keystroke analysis of their
tracing and
The difference, if you talk about something, I can do this because I've been practicing. And talent to me would be something like with the potential. Like if you haven't practiced, you might not be good, but you have some sort of potential to kind of grasp things fast. Or so I think the word is a bit challenging to me. Like, what do you really mean by talent?
So the whole area of talent identification has been progressing in these 3 stages, where first you were obsessed about, I think, the individuals and their innate ability or whatever, and then you shifted focus to the teachers on how to facilitate. But I think focus has now been shifted onto the whole educational environment. How does that foster talent and make them harness their potential? So I think this is also the broader picture that you're talking about here, right?
The reason I'm bringing this up is because this is becoming a greater and greater concern to the program management of our education. And so being able to foster talent and identify talent during courses like this has become really central. Yeah, and I think this is really difficult, just to finish here, I think that is really difficult when we talk about innate ability or previous training.
These have doesn't really have to do anything with talent,
No.
I would like.
So
Just
And I think
background.
it's, one of the things you also want to foster is kind of the grit. Which I sort of
Absolutely, like
rather
self-discipline and, putting in the hours.
And I think a really good way to do that is actually like through like data analysis. And I've seen tools that they have, where students are programming online. And they do data analytics for, oh, this student spent 15 minutes online today. This student spent 3.5 hours.
Hmm.
And then you multiply that over the weeks of a course and you can really see the students that stand out, who put the time in. Like, I think that, like, if you want to answer the question, I think it's through monitoring and surveillance.
Yeah.
Did you get monitoring and surveillance?
CCTV.
But I mean, some time ago, like in 2006, now, it's a long time ago. I looked into self-efficacy with for programming students. So they did the self-efficacy test at the beginning of first programming course, at the end of the first programming course, and the year after the first programming course to see, well, self-efficacy in programming. And I mean, okay, we got results out of that, but what the students also said, that just doing this test made them more aware, conscious about their personal development, and that it actually helped them in some way, that we made it obvious, okay, so you have actually done some improvement, or you are expressing that you have developed here in this area, and I think that was really good for them. They had stronger self-efficacy after a year.
But may I just then pose a second question then, because what research also finds is that difficult exercises can foster better self-efficacy and indirectly also mental models and understanding of programming languages than necessarily easy exercises. But there's also a breaking point where too many overcomplicated exercises sort of breaks your mind, right? And then we have this span of students that are very well programmers or good at programming, where those that are really struggling, right? So my question to you is, how do you guys currently balance this of challenges? We've got a great suggestion, the idea of helping and teaching or explaining to others.
Yeah.
In terms of exercises, is there anything you do or you wanted to do?
So my experience comes from teaching at the high school level. So are you interested in high school?
I'm interested in anything. Yeah.
So like I think curriculum that has like this approach of like very many small tasks is really good. So maybe you have like some kind of lesson, and then you have, like 4 or 5 or 6 different exercises, and the students can do all of them, but maybe it's only recommended that they do a couple. And then you have like a bread variety for them to choose from, maybe also with some difficulty, and then just like mängd träning, not like training, like what's it, mängd träning?
Train.
Exercise, or
Yeah, but not just training, but like lots of training, training the same thing over and over again, so that you really get concurrency for weeks. And then if you put some kind of data analysis on top of that, then you can really see the students that struggle, that spend, okay, this student spent a half hour on this exercise, whereas all the other students in the class spent 5.
Yeah,
So maybe that's a student that we need to go talk
to. It's a bit of a problem, because if you take math for instance, some of the math books are sort of like, okay, we do this, and then there is heaps of similar things.
Yeah.
And people get super bored. Even though the idea is that you kind of practice till it's in the backbone, kind of like, but the effect is also like, you get, this is so boring, I won't do it. So there is a trade-off there, and I think it's, especially if you have, well, talented students or someone who catches on fast, the same thing heaps and heaps and heaps of times is not going to work for those people.
But I think Martin, who's doing this project in Singapore, they had a graphic-based programming environment, and like the platform that they had was really impressive, because everything it wasn't just input and output of the text, but it was, you have a program that generates this picture or this effect or this animation or this.
We're using that now from this fall here also
in
PKD. program construction and data structures.
Nice.
If you're interested in a quick and dirty, cheap solution to put the students more or less on the same level, before they even solve the programming exercise, ask them to write the algorithm for it. And I promise you, yeah, like the advanced students are going to slow down a bit, because that means that they have to think about how to get to the solution.
So I can say what we do in our CS1 course. So we have a set of mandatory assignments that everyone has to do. Then we have, for those who are fast and need extra challenges, we have 1 or 2 extra assignments that are non-mandatory. And they usually require you to not only sit down, read the question and go directly from reading the problem to writing the code. You actually have to think and process and practice reading. And we say to them, okay, you can do this if you want to learn stuff, but you don't really have to do it. And it's your time, it's your money. Choose if you want to have, you know, like free time or actually learn something.
I mean, I see this with my students in the high school. Some students, they get into a place where they like get into their own project or something, and I mean, they just take hours. Like, that can be 15, 20 hours a week.
We don't have anyone online.
Oh,
Of the students, for lack of a better term, nationalities when they're CS1.
CS1, this is 95% Danish, a couple of Swedes, Norwegians, Faroe Islands, Iceland.
Around the median age of 21, 22. Yeah.
directly from high school.
Or 1 year of backpacking, 3 years or something, right?
Yeah, 2 or 3 years after. So I think the statistics from 5 years ago was that it's only 1 in 7 that actually go directly from high school to university. In the interest of us running out of time now, I think.
Oh, no, we're out of time. Everything we do here now is optional. Okay, people learn when they want.
One last thing I would like to highlight, there's much more we could dig into, but this is the idea that you're also mentioning, that going from problem to solution is not a straight path. It shouldn't be a straight path, but the students believe that it is a straight path. And what Sophia, who is currently researching some of this and based on our changes in the course, found that our students have become really capable based on the various tasks we give them in the exercise during class. They've become really good at keyword identification. So in problem specification, they can quite fast see what kind of data structure they need to use, what kind of iteration, what is it that they need to compose. But putting things together in an actual solution is still missing, right? So strategies for translating from problem to solution is still sort of lacking, right? And so what we believe, I think this is Klaus's and I's idea of this, that sometimes you need to translate the problem into either a pseudocode algorithm or some kind of description that is closer to actually programming. And you can do this as many times as required of the complexity of the given program, and the solution you generate depending on the variation of separate problem description you get, right? That might be a variation of that solution, right? So this is something we still need to do more explicitly, and going back all the way back to the start, CS1 version 2.1 would include more of this.
And we have that in our CS1 course. We have several workshops where we work with problem solving, going from a problem description to the code without doing the coding. And that is very valuable for students.
It is, but I also think now we talked about repetitive exercise where you keep doing the same over and over, as an example of how we sometimes do it in mathematics. They are typically smaller problems, right?
Yeah.
And so as the problem descriptions need to be somewhat larger, and in our case, it's really the 4-year project, not 4-year project, the 4 weeks project that makes the students practice this. And then live coding actually also explicitly takes them through this journey.
If I'm kind of, I think we're talking about different problems in a way here, like, because I was complaining to you right recently, but I think from the scientific computing division was doing a lot of introductory programming here. One of the things they saw was when they kind of introduced a lot of small exercises where they more or less forced the team to do them, the results were better. Then of course you can think about what do you mean by result? Well, they passed the exams.
Yeah.
Maybe pattern matching, right? Just unconscious pattern matching.
Yeah.
Look like this, I do like that. Looks like this, I do
So
like
again, I mean, what are you practicing? And then I think it becomes interesting to think about talent or what, or the thing you had there, kind of keyword.
But that's.
It's like, I think you need that too. You need to kind of get some sort of basic, and you started out with saying you wanted to make sure that the students know how to write a for loop or a while loop or something like that. And if that's the target, then you have one. There is one strategy you can work with, kind of lets them repeat and repeat and repeat, and they get to the pattern matching. But then you also talked a bit about how do you inspire the others? How do you deal with them? Which seems to be a rather different problem. I'm not criticizing. This is.
But I think I've heard them talk about you want to have like a low floor and a high ceiling, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the way that we have approached to, or the approach that we have taken to avoid them getting stuck into pattern matching is this thing that they sit down with TAs to present their solutions. Because when they do that, we can probe them, we can poke a little and see, okay, what do you really understand? You can then ask what if questions that they can't apply pattern matching to.
No, det är bra, men it takes a deft hand and a good eye.
Yeah, but I mean,
So at least we're not gonna reach that point today, but what we're doing is that when the first step is introducing a new concept, right? That is including showing the syntax of the language construct. That is step one for somebody to build programmed. However, the second part is understanding the semantics of that might come through practice in that particular block of programming of the program language construct. It is then using that in combination with what you previously learned. And then you keep building on top of that. That is the approach the course is taking. So we're not explicit, and as we go up and we add more things, right? The first time they see a new construct, it will be that in isolation or as much in isolation as can be. But then the next exercise, and once we reach the end of the lecture, that will be a problem description based in reality, where they themselves need to identify what they've learned during the lecture and the previous lectures they need to combine into do this. So it's not exclusively the individual programming constructs. It is practicing that to then practice in combination what has been previously taught, just to clarify that.
I just found out from your colleague that the language construction is Danish.
Yeah.
So,
political choice.
yeah.
Yeah.
But also, like, when I was teaching in England, we had like the majority of the students were international background. So another, I don't know, wrench to throw into this problem was the language of instruction, right? So we had students who would be, you know, if you give them instructions in their native language, then they would excel. But they had problems with English. So there's also the wording of the problem that you are presenting to them.
This is actually something we encountered quite practically. This was a refugee student who came in and had a really rough time partaking, in particular due to the language, actually, but also for other reasons. And that was extremely difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
And I think for him, he said explicitly that he translates from Danish to English back into his native language. That's the way he did it, right? And then something completely different. For the first time, we had blind students.
Yes. We also had a blind
Yes.
student in the course this year.
Yes, that's a completely other type of having difficulties understanding a problem description. right?
Block programming did not go good for the blind
No,
students.
exactly. And I can tell you, UJ is also terrible for blind students.
Just look at Quorum.
Yeah.
Quorum, it's a language which is supposedly good for being read out loud. And something interesting happened is that the US passed a law that they should seem often is to all people with other kinds of disabilities, in particular blind students. And the state of Maryland made a choice to replace the, I think the CS1 language with Quorum because they trivially offer, you know, blind students. So probably this language is going to take off because of political reasons.
As they do, right? With that, one final thing for me, and then we have the discussion continue. I found it very fruitful to discuss this with you guys, because this is the first time we brought this outside of our university. And beyond Michael Kaspersen and Aalborg and so on. So at least to me, this is very, very valuable. I hope also that the conversation in between you guys had some value. But the big question is, are the students learning to code? We don't know is the answer really, but according to themselves. Yeah.
I want to teach your perspective on that.
Yeah, we'll get that in a month and we'll send an email
I
saying.
mean, but also, are they learning to code or are they learning to program?
Yeah.
Because I think there is a contrast there.
In Danish, we use the words interchangeably, and I mistakenly put code here.
And we do that too. I mean,
Yeah.
lots of people do. So
Yeah.
that's why I asked.
Yeah.
But I mean, in our CS1 course, we try very intentionally to be programming language agnostic. So we talk about principles. We don't talk about
We do this.
for loops. We don't talk about syntax. We talk about repetition. We talk about
We're not that.
conditional repetition. We talk about iterative repetition instead of while and for loops. We talk about.
You are then definitely more language agnostic than we are, but we do
Talk
follow.
about it in those terms as well.
Yes, and flow, what is it?
Flow execution.
Execution.
Control flow diagram.
Yeah, control flow diagrams in terms of what happens, while we might use the typical language specific.
And
ones
our
for it.
philosophy is
Yeah.
definitely, we want to teach them how to program and not how to program specifically.
Which is also why
Just the.
How
exactly
many different languages does your student use
7 or 8 after the bachelor's.
during the first 3 years?
Yeah.
How many it's like here?
7 or 8 depending on the courses you take. Or 6 to 8, I would say. I think I knew 7 after my bachelor.
7?
I think so. Saying
I know students.
2, 3.
I know, we talked also a little bit about like hidden curriculum. So you talk about like, oh, the design courses, they're not as technical, they're not as perfected. So I know students that have come through the master's program saying that they haven't really had to program individually, or like most of the stuff is like in group
That's
assessments.
a problem at our place as well.
How are you going to assess whether the students, the part 2, are you gonna give them exams and then?
We will see at the exam at least how they perform. Maybe I will have the time to sit in and actually also do some qualitative analysis of that.
Because exams are not the best way to test students' understanding.
But we do have a program allowed, talk while you program allowed kind of thing, like where we engage, lots of different things.
And we can also follow the progress for the next coming period, so not only.
One problem with this, we tried to get Michael Kaspersen to come on. We have a censor, so in Denmark we have to always have an external examiner from another independent university to come in. Protects the students from against the teachers giving the grades, based on other things. Probably very similar thing here. No, we have to have this. Anyway, so we have to have this, which is great. But Michael Kaspersen
Sometimes.
it's expensive. Michael Kaspersen unfortunately failed to, he didn't get registered on his list, and so we've been trying to get him.
I'll volunteer if you want me to, I'm external.
But the beauty of, but also the beauty of Michael in particular is that he's been centering this the last many
It would
years.
be a gold mine to get that.
But I think the real problem with this is not whether we will be able to assess it, because I can think of multiple different ways of doing that. The real problem is that so many things are going on. That it will be difficult to attribute one of the single 4 changes, right? I think that's the real problem. Ideally, we would have 4 CS1 courses where we could isolate it just.
Can't really get the right answer to that anyway, because it's gonna be different for different students. And
Of course.
I mean, some of the things might work for this cohort or this part of the
But
cohort.
not the next year.
But I would expect,
But
but I would expect the answer, if you went about studying this, you would absolutely include this as, a richness of it would not be simply, this is better or worse, it would be like, taking into account, the many variables for in particular prior.
But I think the point is, like, if you introduce several things, you're really increasing the chance of success. That's part of it. If you say, oh, we're gonna identify the best way, then I think you're gonna be
Very successful.
finding something that's gonna fail in that.
I like very much your way of talking about this earlier. You said that the biggest threat to the validity of this initiative is all the other initiatives.
But again, I mean, it's like, it really depends on what do you even wanna know.
Mm.
And then what's important, and then,
I mean, I can say a little bit, one of my biggest fears about education at the computer science education at the university, which is why I really want to study education at the high school, is that regardless of really what students do in like a computer science bachelor's program, you go, you take some courses, some are good, some are bad, you learn some stuff. If the program gives you like this sense of identity as a software developer, that's actually what you kind of get hired on in the end, whether or not your technical skills are sharp.
But I think that's also where CS1 course is really important in regards to all those other things.
Yeah.
That is in terms of self-efficacy for the rest of the core for the education.
Foundation.
It is motivation in other ways, both in future prospects of career, but also in your alumni, and where we talk about alumni data, these are the people you're going to industry with, starting startups with, or whatever you're going to do. So I think CS1, and I think that's the most terrifying thing of this, is that if this goes bad, it
It's a
can
big
also
degree.
ruin a
We're gonna-
entire,
So CS1 is the most important course, says the CS1 teacher.
yes.
But I remember like in my home university, the CS1 course was actually intentionally made easy. And then the buzzsaw course was in the second semester.
But that's not fair though, because like you give the students a full sense of security, right? And then you they stay.
See, I don't like the term that you say it hard, then I believe that the RAM that, because the CS1 course is meant to bridge the gap between this and future courses.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing right now is a slight disconnect from those further ahead. Now, we've also identified that due to conversation and anecdotal evidence that some of the course managers increase their focus on things that are not necessarily their focus to raise the level of the students coming out of the CS1.
Yeah.
So we need to find a balance in keeping the motivation and self-efficacy going up while still giving, them the knowledge needed, right?
and I think what you mean by needed, I think that's a program design.
Yes.
Thing, and it's not like CS2 is gonna be like this no matter where you are. I mean, it should be, of course, connected to CS1, and easy, that might be different takes on what is easy. Is it really easy, or is it sort of like, or if you just reduce the content a bit and learning that better, it might be an easy way, but
Is it
when you're more solid platform, I think that's part of what Ray had, and also Mark Guthrie when he's doing things where he kind of, well, let's focus on the basic things and make sure that they learn this. Then, of course, you don't address the other question you had about what do you do with the students who really kind of grasp this, who don't have an issue at all with understanding for loops and while loops or the basic stuff.
And those who use while loops as for loops.
Oh,
While and in range.
no, please don't.
I don't know if you have seen this either, but like here we've also had like just the effects of the COVID pandemic on the incoming students at the university. We have students coming in now, and like roughly half of their gymnasia like upper secondary time is like compromised learning with like distance undervisning and fjärrundervisning. So I don't know if that's
the
one
really,
effect, right? That you mentioned that they're slightly older because, they couldn't travel, and all of a sudden they just all went backpacking like as much as they could, right?
but last year we didn't really see that, right? We didn't see any impact on, we did see in CS1, we did see impacts on grades, but whether that's attributable to COVID is really difficult due to the fact that the 7-weekly exercises or handles I talked about was 20 weeks or 20 days, one each day, or 20 consecutive days that year. We call it the failed harvest because it was called the
Somebody
harvest.
else, not us, was in charge.
Yeah,
of doing that.
the point is that was really, really rough
Right.
on the students, and that was noticeable in every kind of evaluation, and also visible at the grades.
I think we relieve ourselves of any responsibility.
But the point is, we will probably then have a problem this year, right? Because we had those circumstances last year, beyond COVID, and we don't know whether this will impact.
But here the math teachers talk about students like in whole like standard deviations, like noticeably like, wow, you know, maybe
Going
we
down or?
going down.
Yeah.
From the COVID, they're like, oh, maybe we'd fail 15% before, now we're up to like 30.
There was a big difference this spring with the students I had that came back from the pandemic. As I had them in the spring semester in the second year, so they had never been on campus almost, and they were much worse than the previous cohorts. But I just want to go back to this thing. Okay, should CS1 be easy? I don't think that our CS1 course is that easy, but what we try to do during the first year is that we have lots of resources in terms of contact time with teachers and TAs. So because let's face it, some of the students that when they come from upper secondary school or what you call it, they are not very mature. They don't know how to study. They are barely independent.
Yeah.
We saw that very clearly, so there's.
So we guide them a lot during the first year to make them mature as humans. It's like the military service or something.
And education is supposed to be not a product of the individual courses, but transformation.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
different person when you go into the
We
system.
just we had a separate TA helping me develop exercises that were sort of additional exercises, right? 4 people out of 98 responded that they actually did those exercises, and that was extra material that ranged a lot in complexity.
There are quite a lot of resources on this course, and we were 2 full-time teachers on it. No way I could have done this without Sebastian.
So there was a lot of hours.
And it was actually proposed about probably way beyond 100%, workload, so.
Yeah, but let's hope that that the results indicate that this was.
I think if you look at this format of going from 2+2, like, lectures and exercises, to going to the mixed format, I think if you rank the students, I know this is a dangerous thing to do, right? You rank them from the ones who struggle the most and the ones who are the best. I think that what this format does is that it works. It's very hard for these ones because, you're presenting something. They start out trying it out, and if they really struggle, they don't have enough time until we go on to the next thing. These are gonna really, really, really struggle. They don't, in a normal exercise session, they would just use the whole 2 hours on the first exercise, and they still do something. Here, maybe they get a glimpse of one, and then next thing, they get something that doesn't work. I think it's very hard on those. I also think it's very, very tiring for these to sit through it like, okay, you just explained it, I already got it, and now I have to sit and wait to do all this exercise. And the whole thing takes 4 hours instead of 2. They could just, listen to the lecture, they got everything, and they just apply it immediately. So it's hard on them. But I think the good thing is that this one, I think it's very wide. I think this is very, very wide.
Yeah.
At least that's what the
Indication right behind you.
they also evaluated the speed of the lecture. I mean,
I think one of the things would be to try to look at students as well. I mean, what could be done for them, but not with a high price. There could, at least the high flyers could probably be done pretty cheaply, but the ones who are struggling, I guess they would need time.
Yes.
It's actually kind of interesting because we do provide recordings of each session, and people use that, right? In particular, the intention is that you use that in case you're sick or in case you have a doctor's appointment or something. And I do believe some of the people to the far right use them. I think that is an opportunity for them. Actually, the course description for each lecture also specifies what we're going through, so not a lot of people read those one-liners, but they were there. However, what I've also seen in individual talks with students that feel like they fall behind is that we have some people down here who really should be attending the lectures, who do not attend the lectures, who do not make the exercises as they intended.
That's like the false negative category.
Yeah, right.
But I think that these students over here,
They wouldn't survive any.
but I think we address them well in this sort of assessment that we have, where we sit down once a week with the TA, because a large ratio of students, they are silent. Maybe they don't understand that they are falling behind. Maybe they just, but I mean, since they have to be assessed every week, we have someone sitting down with them, asking them what they know. And if we're discovering that, okay, you are not in sync with the course curriculum, then send them to this extra workshop so they can catch up and not fall into.
We do the same through the tests that are distributed over the semester. That's also based on that I've had the conversation with students. So these 1 hour tests allows us to identify, and if you do not pass those tests, you go to a retest, and that retest is preceded by a broader course in the study. But we do have that to some extent. It's not comprehensive in that it's each week, it's 3 times a semester.
It's not that they're silent and we don't identify them, and they will self-diagnose that there is an issue.
Yeah, and we see a significant improvement in that 15% failed the first test, and that went down drastically to 3 and 2.
But you're talking about the CATIS test then?
No, now we're talking about the 3 mandatory
One
tests.
hour
Okay.
programming test in the auditorium.
Yeah.
On their own computer.